Welcome everyone to today's devotion. We find ourselves in Matthew chapter 22, where it's not as action-packed as the previous chapter was, but we still have a lot going on here. The main issue is that of trying to trick Jesus. Right? The religious elites are under assault, as we saw in chapter 21, but now they are trying to regain their popularity, their authority among the people, because the people perceive Jesus as a great rabbi, even a prophet. And so they've got to prove that they are better than Jesus, essentially, which never works out. But the chapter begins with another parable. So this is really the third of three parables in a row that Jesus gives. Remember that the chapter breaks in the Bible were not inspired by God, right? Those came later in order to help readers. Verses came after that. And so this is the third of three parables. It's the parable of the wedding feast. So he says the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king, right? It's not an accident that this is a king, who gave a wedding feast for his son and sent his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding feast, but they would not come. That's the issue, is it could be a big wedding. And so the king of all people invites the well-to-do, the connected, all of them to come to the king's feast. And they don't want to come because they're too busy. Can I give you some insight when it comes to weddings and funerals? I've done countless of them. They are always at an inconvenient time. Always. Right? Every funeral I've done was at an inconvenient time. Every wedding I've done was at an inconvenient time. Right? This is reality. But what you see here is all of them are busy on their farm. All of them are busy doing other things. In fact, it says, verse 5, they paid no attention and went off, one to his farm, another to his business. Some even tried to kill the servants. Right? So what does the king do? Verse 8, the wedding feast is ready, the king says, but those invited were not worthy. Go therefore to the main roads and invite to the wedding feast as many as ye find. And those servants went out to the roads and gathered all whom they found, both bad and good, so the wedding hall was filled with guests. So, this is a picture of the kingdom of God. We saw this in chapter 21. Really, this is a summary of chapter 21, we could say. Chapter 21, Jesus cleanses the temple, and thus pushing out those who would profit from worship. And as a result, the people who come into the temple now come to Jesus looking for healing, the blind and the handicapped, right? and the poor. Right? So this is the point of the parable. Jesus is he's saying, look, I'm done with a lot of you guys. Those who are invited to the wedding feast are those whom you deem unworthy. But you wouldn't come. So now we go to them, and they will come, and they will have joy. Well, this leads, starting in verse 15, with a series of challenges to Jesus, right? People may be following Jesus, but is he really as sharp as everyone says, okay? So what we get is a series of questions Jesus has asked. The first question has to do with paying taxes to Caesar. Yes, all of our favorite subject is paying taxes. Hopefully you got your taxes done this year, although I think you still have till July, but there's consequences of that. I don't know. Government don't know. So the first question then starts with paying taxes to Caesar. Verse 15 says, the Pharisees went out and plotted how to entangle him in his words. It's almost like they're going back on Jesus' Twitter account from 10 years ago to see if they can bring something out, because that's what cancel culture does. It's essentially what they're doing here. Can we trick Jesus, have him say something, and then use it against him? Right? It's what we're doing today. Just to people we don't like to get rid of, we dig up old video, dig up old tweets, find an old picture, have someone who will make a false accusation. We do the same thing today. So let's just not stand here in self-righteousness, right? So the question is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? And remember that if you're a Jew, you believe that Rome, headed by Caesar, is Rome is Babylon. That's actually going to show up in the book of Revelation. If we get there, we'll talk about it. And so they are occupying power. You are a free people currently controlled by Caesar. And so to pay taxes to Caesar is to therefore support a system you abhor. So there are those on different levels of extremes. So it's like the Zealots, for example, and we'll talk more about the Zealots when we get to Barabbas. But the Zealots believed you don't pay taxes to Caesar. In fact, you fight Caesar. They're trying to overthrow the Roman Empire, or at least kick them out of Israel. There are others, like the Herodians, who are in bed with Rome. And they say, of course you got to pay taxes to Caesar. They keep us safe. That is where we get our army and stuff like that. So whatever Jesus says, he's going to upset people. Jesus' answer is illustrative. Verse 18, why put me to the test, you hypocrites? Right? Immediately he shows that this is all a trick to them. They don't care about Jesus' answer. They care about tricking Jesus. So he says, give me a coin, all right, and he says there, verse 20, whose likeness and inscription is this? And they said Caesar, right? So we would have Washington on the quarter, for example, right? Lincoln on the penny, all that sort of stuff. Then he said to them, therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Right? I trust we were familiar with this. What does he basically say? He says, basically, like, all y'all are wrong. The issue here is image. Give to Caesar that which bears his image. Do not give to Caesar that which bears the image of God. See? So yes, pay your taxes, right? It's got his image on it. But do not give your soul to him. And boy, does American evangelicalism need to hear that. Do not give your soul to Caesar. You are the image of God. Give your soul, your very life to him. And if that means to walk in poverty for the sake of the kingdom of God, then be poor for the glory of God. May we not give our soul to Caesar. Well, that leads to the second question, in case I'm not in enough trouble already. And that has to do with the resurrection. So verse 23 says, the same day, again, they're just one after another, the Sadducees came to him who say there is no resurrection. We don't have time to get into the depth of all of this. But what you need to know is the Pharisees and Sadducees differ on a lot of things. They differ on which books were inspired by God in the Old Testament. The Sadducees only believed it was the books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, all 5. Pharisees held to what we call the Old Testament. Another area they disagree with is the resurrection. The Sadducees believed that we didn't have souls, we weren't embodied beings, or anything like that. We were just physical beings. When we died, we essentially died. The Pharisees believed in final resurrection. So in many ways, the Pharisees were more like Jesus, theologically speaking, than the Sadducees were. They're just missing the boat on the key issues of the gospel and the kingdom of God. With that said, the Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection. So they come to Jesus and say, all right, here's a story for you, Jesus. A man dies having no children, verse 24. His brother must marry the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. This was practiced in ancient Near Eastern culture, and it's in the Mosaic law. We don't do it today because it's not moral law, it's ceremonial law. Anyways, so basically, if a brother dies suddenly and he has no heir, if a man dies suddenly with no heir, his brother must come and produce an heir with his wife for his brother. Okay, it's the Levirate law. Well, the story here is the first brother dies. And so the next brother comes, he dies, and the next brother, and there's 7 brothers. Eventually, someone's got to see if this woman is a poison, like they poison everybody. But nevertheless, that's the scenario. All 7 brothers die, and then they say, in the resurrection, right? They think the whole resurrection thing is a silly idea, and they think this scenario proves their point, right? In the resurrection, therefore, of the 7, whose wife will she be? She was married to all 7 brothers. And Jesus' answer is well, he calls them fools, right? He says, you are wrong because you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God. Remember, these guys have the whole Bible memorized. The Sadducees certainly would have had the first 5 books of the Bible memorized. Verse 30, in the resurrection, so he just affirmed that there will be a resurrection. This is our hope as believers. Isn't it good to know that this is not as good as it's going to get? This is as bad as it's going to get. This world is as bad as it's going to get. What awaits us is far greater than what we may see here. We looked at Romans 8 last Sunday, and where Paul says that the present sufferings of this age is nothing compared to the future glories that awaits us, right? So Jesus says, in the resurrection, they're neither married nor given into marriage, but are like angels in heaven. When he says they're like angels in heaven, what he doesn't mean that we will be disembodied beings, chubby with little wings playing a harp on clouds that can somehow hold us. That is not what Jesus means here. He says in this case of being married and being given into marriage, that being my phone, we're like angels like that, right? And that's the key difference, is there won't be dating in heaven, right? All to the glory of God, right? Which means my daughter, I won't have to, go through the whole dating process again with her when we get to heaven. Isn't that good news, right? His point is that you're missing what the resurrection is. Verse 31, and as for the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what is said of God? And Jesus here quotes from the book of Exodus. It's not an accident, because the Sadducees believe in the book of Exodus. Had he quoted from Isaiah, they would have just said, well, that's not really given to us by God. He says, God says, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Or this is from Genesis and Exodus. He is not the God of the dead, it says, but of the living. What does it say there? The text doesn't say, I was the God of Abraham, because Abraham's dead. I was the God of Isaac, because Isaac's dead. I was the God of Jacob, because Jacob's dead. Rather, it's, I am right now the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is another reason why we don't believe in soul sleep, that you die and you wait for the final resurrection, and so you're just taking a very long nap for some of us. But rather we believe a temporary period of disembodiment, waiting for our final resurrection. Well, this leads to the third question. A Pharisee came and asked the question, Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And Jesus says to him, well, God's kind of straightforward with it, right? Deuteronomy 6, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second is like it. You should love your neighbor as yourself. Of these two commandments depend all the law of the prophets. Now, just quickly, remember the transfiguration was Moses and Elijah, the law and the prophets. So we see that designation here. But I trust we're familiar with this scene, right? That it is all about, all right, tell us what is the greatest commandment. Because in the religious system, some commandments were more important than others, right? So we care more about you doing this than we do about you doing this. This is what religion does. In the Catholic world, there is venial sins and mortal sins. If you commit mortal sins, you may not make it to heaven, even through purgatory. So there's not really any confession for it. But venial sins, well, then we can work something out, even if it does involve 10 million years in purgatory. But hey, could have been 11 million years, right? Religion does this, right? So the religion of intersectionality does this. You can tolerate a number of things if you are far enough down the intersectionality lane, but if you're not on an intersectionality lane, well, that sort of behavior and language can't be tolerated. So, but Jesus says, look, I can summarize all of it. If you love God and love your neighbor, that is the summary of the 10 Commandments, you will keep all the commandments. Why? Because sin is corrosive, righteousness is cleansing. That is to say that it affects us not just as individuals, but as a community, us as relational beings, us as a people. Well, so what Jesus does, I don't want to spend time on this in verse 41 and following, is Jesus asks them a question, and the question is, who was the son of David, right? And Jesus proves a point that basically David spoke of Jesus. It's quite an audacious claim that he's making there. But this is the summary of it all. No one was able to answer him a word, nor from that day did anyone dare to ask him any more questions. What you really have here is Matthew trying to show that not only is Jesus a true and greater Abraham, remember the genealogy, a true and greater David, he's also a true and greater Solomon. Much as people tried to come and trick Solomon to see how wise he was, like the iconic and infamous story of the two women who claimed that this was their baby. And Solomon says it's come in half, and that's how you figured out who the real mother was. So too Jesus here, though they try to trick him, they can't. He's a true and greater Solomon. And this is the man they will reject. And they will crucify. Lord willing, we will see you all here next weekend, or next week rather. Monday we'll look at chapter 23. So next week we'll almost be done with the book of Matthew, which will, by then, the economy will have started to open up in some sense, and we'll be gearing up to open up our doors here at East Frankfort Baptist Church. Hopefully I'll see you guys Sunday morning, either live on Facebook at 8:30 or in person at our drive-in worship at 11 with Sunday school on Zoom between. See you then.